All right, well, let's go ahead and get this kicked off. I think we can do that. So,
Excellent.
well, hello. I'm very excited tonight to get a chance to introduce Jeff Stinson. Jeff is an elder law attorney. He is one of our founding members with Life's Co-Pilot. He deals in estates and Medicaid and VA and all kinds of stuff, and not just for elders. I believe you do stuff with dependents and stuff that have issues as well. I'll let you explain that. But today he's going to be talking about something that, quite frankly, is confusing if you are not an attorney, probably, and maybe even if you are one. And we're going to be talking about the uses and misuses of Miller trusts. And in fact, the total confession here, I am working with Jeff right now, working on doing a Miller's trust for a family member. So I'm in the middle of this. So anyway, and I am confused. So I'm looking forward to this as well. So Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you for having me this evening. And I promise this really isn't a snipe hunt. We were making a joke as we were getting here because I have some clients that look at me when I start explaining the concept of this Miller Trust and what it's for. And I think they think I'm pulling their leg. They really think it's a joke, and it's not a joke. This is a legal entity. It is a requirement through the Medicaid eligibility process. And in particular, that's what we're referring to here. This is an element to Medicaid eligibility. So Medicaid is, for those who don't know, is a source of long-term care coverage. In fact, statistically, we know probably about 60% of paid care, covered care, is paid through the Medicaid system. So many people, a good majority of folks, rely on the Medicaid system to help pay for care. The good news is you don't have to be completely destitute. You don't have to be completely impoverished in order to qualify, but you do have to fit within certain precise requirements, and kind of can break those down into 4 requirements. One is you have to be medically need the care that you're looking for. The second is you need to have assets below a certain asset limit. It's $2,000 for an individual. It's much more liberal for a married couple where one of them does not need services. And the third thing is passing what they call the income cap, overcoming the income cap. And that's where the Miller Trust come from. It's kind of curious to me because I celebrated my 20th year as an attorney last week or 2 weeks ago. And I was a paralegal for a firm for a number of years before that. And the myths that I continue to hear about with Medicaid, really, it's kind of crazy. So the fact that so many people that just might even have a cursory knowledge about Miller trusts it's interesting to me, because I get that question a lot. And the reason why we're going to talk about this today is I get a lot of questions where I'll have calls that say, Jeff, I need to set up a Miller Trust. And I'll say, okay, well, why do you think that? Well, I need to protect my assets. And so here's our first lesson we're going to learn about here. A Miller Trust is not designed to protect assets. Again, it's designed to protect income. So get your bags out. We're going to go on this snipe hunt. We're going to talk a little bit about what all this means. I'm going to start with just a brief history lesson, because the official name of these trusts is called a qualified income trust. And I think if that was the name a lot of folks used when they said you need a qualified income trust, it'd make more sense of why that's not designed to protect assets. But colloquially, we refer to them as Miller Trust quite a bit. And the reason being, back decades ago, there was a lady in Colorado who was in a nursing home, and Colorado had a income cap on services. I don't know what the cap was, but just for sake of illustration, we'll say they said if your monthly income is more than $2,500, it doesn't matter what your medical expenses are, you don't qualify. And it just happened, the lady was named Lottie Ham. It just happened that Lottie's income was just a tad over that $2,500. It's like $2,550. Even though she had a $5,000 monthly nursing home bill, she didn't qualify for Medicaid. She had no assets either. So there was no source to pay for that difference. And there was no relief whatsoever because of the cap. So an astute attorney decided, well, why don't we try something like put some of this income in a trust and see what will happen. And of course, the Colorado Medicaid agency originally said, we're not buying that. We're not allowing folks to do that. But it went up to the Supreme Court, and there's a case called Miller versus Ibarra. And there's where your Miller trust come from. Miller was Lottie's niece, who was also her power of attorney, and in fact had subsidized Lottie's care for a while before she said, I can't do this anymore. She's the one that took this trust and said, there's a problem with this income cap. People need some relief from the income cap. We proposed this trust. The court said, yeah, we think that's a great idea. And then in fact, Congress thought it was such a great idea that in 1993, they made it a statute. So since 1993, we've had the Miller Trust as a means to get around this income cap. Fast forward to 2014 in the state of Indiana. Medicaid in Indiana, up until that point, our state said, we want our own Medicaid system. We want to do things the way we want to do it. And in its simplest form, back in the 70s, states had a choice. They could administer their own Medicaid program within an outline, but could really fill in a lot of details. They could be more restrictive than what other states were doing, or they could follow kind of a model plan where things were kind of linked together. And Indiana decided they didn't want the model plan. They wanted to do it themselves. They were only like, I think there were 6 or 7 that decided to do it themselves. But in 2014, lots of legal changes. We have health insurance exchanges. We had the Affordable Care Act, things like that. Indiana decided, you know what, this is getting to be too much. We want to become one of these model states. You might hear it as an SSI or a 1634 state. And all that means is all of our public benefits programs are now all linked together instead of being separate entities. And so when Indiana decided we want to be a 1634 state like everybody else, well, suddenly Indiana had an income cap that they didn't have before. Up until that point, it really didn't matter what your monthly income was. As long as you met the asset test, you qualified for benefits. And now there's an income cap. So that's where the Miller Trust come from. And I know the state itself really hit folks with lots of information about, you know what, if you've been on Medicaid for years, you are going to need a Miller Trust if your income is over the income cap. And so I know that's why lots of people have heard about Miller Trust, but I think there's this general misunderstanding of what they do. And we're going to dive into that here in just a second. So that's kind of the history of the Miller Trust. That's why we have them. That's where they come from. That's why they're called Miller Trusts. But the big thing is when Indiana decided to implement an income cap, we had people that needed to do something or they were going to be kicked off the benefits. And that's where this come from. Now, for most people, the Miller Trust is a way to get around that income cap. So right now, anyone that's needing assistance with long-term care services in Indiana has to have monthly income countable, I guess you say countable monthly income less than $2,523. That'll go up in January, but that's what we're at right now. And so for anybody that's seeking Medicaid benefits with income above that, they have to have a Miller Trust to qualify, a qualified income trust. And essentially what happens is the income that's assigned to the trust, that's transferred monthly to the trust, Medicaid says, well, that's not your income anymore. That belongs to the trustee of the trust. So as a result, your income comes down below that income cap. So to illustrate, if I have $26.32 a month, I'm not going to be eligible for Medicaid because the cap is $25.32. But if I create a Miller Trust and put $100, at least $100 in there a month, then I'm going to be under the income cap. I'm going to qualify for benefits. So that's where most people need a Miller Trust. Now I'm going to give an example of another situation where somebody that may have income below the budget will want a Miller Trust. And I'll get to that here in a little bit. But for most people, it's just to get over that income cap. So the trust itself starts with a trust document. I guess I should just kind of explain for folks that really have never heard of a trust. A trust, it's just a container. It's a holding tank here. And you put, a person creates the container and they put stuff in the trust. And they have instructions that they write that a trustee follows for the benefit of a beneficiary. So those instructions are generally a legal document. And what Indiana did for us is when they decided everyone's over the income cap has to have a Miller trust, they created a template. So if you go online to FSSA, they have a template there that you can print off and use. Now, my clients are going to use that because I don't like the dispositive provisions in the state template. But if all else fails, that is one way to get your Miller trust in place. I've written my own because there's certain customization I like to have, certain flexibility I like the trustee to have. Then it also has to be irrevocable. So the trust document says, here's the terms and we can't change them. That's kind of the requirements. Third thing is, again, the trust can only accept income. From a practical standpoint, though, this is setting up a bank account. You're setting up a bank account and you're transferring a certain amount of income into that account. The account is titled in the name of the qualified income trust. So every month, and back to my example, you put $100 into that bank account. That's what qualifies into that account in the name of the trust. As far as who can establish a Miller trust, generally, it's either the recipient or the recipient's legal representative, a power of attorney or a guardian. But Indiana does allow third parties to create a trust, Miller trust, for the benefit of folks who don't otherwise have a legal representative. So some good news there for folks that haven't done enough planning. Someone can create one on their behalf so they can start depositing funds into the account. And typically what I've advised my clients to do, they're going to seed that account with just a minimum balance, because here's the trade-off. Anything left in that Miller trust account, that qualified income trust account at the death of the recipient, first pays back the state of Indiana for anything that Indiana Medicaid has paid on that person's behalf. And that's before it gets to anybody else. So generally we want to keep as little in that account as possible. Once the account's set up, then the person either needs to put all of their income in the account or just whatever's in excess of that 2523. It really doesn't matter as long as you're putting at least the excessive amount inside the account. That's what Indiana Medicaid's looking for, or you're making those monthly deposits. Now, of course, they have to be made in the month that the income's received. So you can't come back later and say, okay, I forgot to put it in September, so I put September, October, November in, all in November. That doesn't work. It has to go in the same month. Now, there's different ways to do this too. You can put all of your income in, or you can put certain sources of income, or you can do a set amount. And I've got different ways that I work with my clients. And Jim, we'll talk through the best way in your situation and in which way to go here. Once the assets are in the Miller Trust, then we need to talk about how to use that for the recipient. So for most people that have Medicaid in a nursing home or home care or even adult daycare, they're going to use what they put in the Miller Trust to satisfy Medicaid's copayment. I'll pause for a second there to explain that. Every Medicaid recipient generally has a copayment, and that copayment's based on their total income in. So even all this stuff's going into the trust, Medicaid itself is saying your copayment based on every source of income you get in a month is this amount. So oftentimes what that happens is that income goes in and it's going to go right back out to satisfy the monthly copayment. Now, there is a situation where that money can build up, and so there could be a couple, but I'm going to explain the one primarily here in just a second. Other uses of that trust If there is a spouse, the trustee can distribute any of those funds to the spouse. That's allowable as long as the trust is written that way. That's one of the reasons why I like my customized form, because the state form doesn't allow that. Other things that the trust can be used for. It can satisfy any allowances to family members. Medicaid for certain family members will say, you get to keep this much income of the recipient. So the trustee can satisfy those allowances. Every recipient gets a personal needs allowance. So they can satisfy their monthly allowance that they get. $52 if you're in a nursing home, $25, $23 if you're receiving services outside a nursing facility. It can pay health insurance premiums. It can pay any other medical expenses. It can pay income taxes, but that's not all. And so let me explain one situation where folks will work with me to set up a Miller Trust, but not necessarily because they have an income cap problem. And that are those that are moving into assisted living that's covered by Medicaid. If I have $2,000, I don't need a Miller Trust because I'm under that cap. But I move into an assisted living facility and Medicaid says your only obligation is to pay the facility $841 a month. Well, suddenly I've got 2,000 coming in, I've got 841 going out, and I got to stay below 2,000. So I can't save money. But folks can put their excess monthly income into the Miller Trust. That allows them to continue to be eligible because that keeps them under 2,000 and it lets those funds build up. So the next question for Jeff should be, well, okay, what can we use that buildup for? Basically anything on behalf of the recipient. There's just two simple rules you have to remember. The one is you never want to give cash directly back to the recipient. So the trustee of the Miller Trust doesn't want to take money out of that account and give it back to the recipient. You always want to be buying things directly on behalf of the recipient. So purchasing a new piece of furniture, buying medical equipment, buying a bus trip to the casino, those things, paying for those things directly. So rule number one, shouldn't be distributing any cash. Rule number two, if what the trustee purchases is food, clothing, or shelter, then the trustee should at least be ensured that the recipient is using some of their own monthly income to buy something in that category. Because Medicaid's rule is if the trustee is buying all that person's food, then the food is considered income. I know it's kind of crazy, but it's considered income, and that can affect eligibility. Or all of the clothing that's considered income affects eligibility. Same with shelter expenses. But if that person says, okay, trustee just bought me a $500 suit, I'm going to buy a pair of socks in the same month, we've satisfied Medicaid because we didn't buy all of the clothes. Same thing with food. My uncle loves hamburgers, so we're going to buy a bunch of hamburgers for him for the month. Just make sure he buys a package of buns. That's all that's required there. So you have to have that nominal amount there, but otherwise it can be used for anything. Now, for most people, again, it's not going to accumulate because you're going to use that Miller Trust to satisfy the co-payment under Medicaid. But in situations like the assisted living, or sometimes maybe another source of coverage steps in. Someone gets sick, they have to be in a hospital for a while. Medicare is covering that hospital stay, so I don't have to pay the facility that much. Well, then I've got extra income here. What I do, it will build up in the Miller Trust, and it can be used for basically, like I said, anything, as long as the trustee doesn't make a distribution directly to the person, buy things on their behalf, and as long as, if it's food, clothing, or shelter, some other nominal amount steps in and takes care of it. So that's really kind of the Miller Trust in a nutshell. If I just could kind of summarize, number one, it is a way to protect income only. It's a way to get around Medicaid's special income limit, their income cap. So assets never go in. And two, typically the funds that are going into the trust are going to be used one of three ways. One, to satisfy the liability, the copay obligation under Medicaid. Two, by just buying things directly on behalf of somebody. And three, if it's food, clothing, or shelter, you want to make sure that there's a nominal amount there that's going into those categories. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's kind of why, Jim, I wanted to spend, I know it wasn't lengthy, but I want to spend some time just kind of reminding everybody what these Miller trusts are, because it does surprise. Just last week I had, in passing, somebody said, Jeff, I need to see you. I want to protect my assets and I need to get a Miller trust set up. And I said, well, you definitely need to see me, because Miller trust isn't going to accomplish what you want, because that's for income only. So that's kind of why I want to have this conversation.
Is there a difference between Medicaid and Medicaid waiver and a Miller's trust?
Excellent question. Both Medicaid and Medicaid waiver both have this requirement. And Medicaid for nursing home care and Medicaid home and community-based services under the waiver both have the same income cap. And so if you are in need of those services and you're over the cap, in both situations, you'll need a Miller trust, qualified income trust.
Okay. I just was curious if there was any difference in the actual usability of, or how it's used or whatever. So
yeah, like I said, the biggest difference there is I have a lot of clients who, when they're in assisted living and their obligation is now $841 a month and they're getting $2,500 a month income, they're like, where am I going to put all this extra money? What am I going to do? So the Miller trust is a good place to park some funds until a rainy day comes up.
Well, we're dancing around Medicaid waiver, because obviously we're just talking about the slice that is the Miller's trust. Mm-hmm. But you made the comment up front that you don't have to be destitute, which is what most people think you have to be to qualify for Medicaid. So you can through other means you can protect assets, and then you can protect income through Miller's trust. What does it, like, for instance, now one question I have is, with a Medicaid waiver, does Medicare go away and then you just have Medicaid, or does it is it a blend?
It's an excellent question. And it is a blend. What happens is most people keep all of their coverage they had before they started Medicaid, and Medicaid just becomes another layer there. And in order of priority, if there's Medicare is always going to be billed first. So a medical bill will go through Medicare first. Then if there's a supplement or some other private insurance, it'll go there second. And then if it's still unpaid, then it will go to Medicaid. So it just so happens long-term care, Medicaid pays for long-term care, because if you send the assisted living bill to Medicare, they're going to say, nope, not us. And they send it to the supplement, the private insurance supplement, they're going to say, nope, not us. It goes to Medicaid. Yeah, we take care of that.
Okay, so basically, like, for instance, there's no reason for, because I'm sure this has got to be, a scary thing trying to figure out how to do this. I've been figuring this for, I've been talking about this for years, so I've got a little bit more into it. But if you have Medicare and you have your doctors, you don't have to worry about losing doctors because they're still on Medicare.
That's right. And in fact, a question I often get is, can I drop, or should I drop my Medicare supplement or my Medicare Advantage plan? And I'm always saying, no, you want to keep those in place, because it's going to allow you a broader coverage. You're going to have more folks that you can go see. And most of these programs, when I talk about that copay that goes under Medicaid, they allow you to keep your premium money. So whatever you're paying for a supplement, you're allowed to deduct that out of your income before they calculate the copay. To say it a little differently, if I'm paying $300 a month for a Medicare supplement and I drop that because I'm on Medicaid, well, I'm just taking that $300 and I'm taking that and paying it over to the nursing home or the assisted living or the home care agency. So I'm not gaining anything there. Keep your insurance coverage in place.
Excellent. Well, that's good news. I was just, like I said, you're going through all these things, and like a Miller's Trust, let's face it, the whole idea of it is to create a little hole for things to fall through, so
Yep.
it's trying to figure out how all those holes work, but that's a big deal to be able to stay with your current plans.
Absolutely.
Now, so the payments that's coming out for your their Medicare supplements or what have you, are those something that's going to that could come out of your Miller's Trust, or would they, is that where some of that money could go, or how does that work?
It can. There's different strategies there. Because this is kind of a convoluted thing. I, I had a client once tell me, so this is just legal money laundering, or Medicaid money laundering is all this is. We've got to put this money in here so it cleans out, goes out to the other side. And I guess that could be an analogy. At the end of the day, you put some money in the Miller Trust, and that could be used to satisfy premiums, or you can still, whatever you keep out in your other account can use to set. It really doesn't matter. I do have some strategies to just make it easier on folks, though, based on where their loved one is residing. If they're in a nursing home, I'll advise them to do one thing, versus if they're in assisted living or needing home care, to do something a little different.
Well, I can see that it's probably every single client has a different level of advice because of their own circumstances being different, as far as income, as far as assets, as far as the
Sure.
care levels.
Sure.
What I guess I'm trying to think about the other things I was thinking about here is like, okay, you can't take, if you're going to buy a bunch of hamburgers for someone and they have to buy buns, okay, is that out of the $25 or the $50, or is that out of or however that works? Or if they have other, if there's other trusts, are there ways of doing it differently there? Or is it, I guess it's obviously a confusing thing. That's why people like you are so vitally important in this.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing I do is just kind of take that illustration and stretch it a little further. Okay. If a person is living at home and they have a Medicaid waiver to help pay for home care, and they're just getting, let's say, $26-23 a month, they're just $100 over the cap. Maybe they're only putting $100 into the trust. Maybe I'll revise it. They're going to put they put all 2,600 into the trust every month. Well, because they're at home, the first 25-23 is their cash to use as they see fit. So that their Social Security and pension comes, they put it all in the Miller Trust. Well, they get 25-23 to use as they see fit. And so if the Miller Trust suddenly says, we're going to buy some hamburgers, we've have $100 a month that's accumulated in here, so we got $1,000, we're going to buy some hamburgers, that person still has $2,523 in income to use to buy the buns. They should have money there. A little different in a nursing home. I only get $52 a month. I don't get $25-23. So if the Miller Trust buys a bunch of hamburgers, I got to use part of my $52 to buy that package of buns, or that pair of socks if it's a new outfit, those types of things.
So it's 25-23 or 50.
52.
52.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So I'm just trying to get some ideas how this works. Well, I can. You were talking about people saying this is a money laundering thing. What I see it as is pretty smart. And from what I understand, I believe you even told me this, and others have as well, that Indiana is one of the more Medicaid waiver friendly states in the way it's set up. And it would make sense to me, because if, like you were talking about the client that caused the Miller Trust to be written, she had 2,500 coming in, or whatever, 2,600, whatever it was, but she had 5,000 going out each month, and there was no money.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, if you were in a Medicaid situation, the only option was a nursing home, which are $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a month. With the Medicaid waiver, they can be in assisted living that might be 3,000, or they could be getting home care that might be 2,500. So the state saves money by doing this as well,
It
which
really
makes
does.
sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, that's kind of where these alternatives come from. Is there a lot of advocacy, of course, but the justification was, hey, overall, you're going to be paying less for people to stay outside of a nursing home. And it really does. It works. The numbers work. I'm happy to report, gosh, it's been maybe 10 years since there was a wait list for waivered services, because the state does budget a minimum or a maximum amount of funds towards covering the alternatives to nursing home care. But in the last 10 years, there's been enough money to keep up with demand. And that, I think that is a big thing in Indiana that is not the case in other states. I said, I've been an attorney for 20 years now. 20 years ago, when I started, if somebody said, I need help with my care, I'd say, well, if you want Medicaid help, you've got to move to a nursing home. That's the only long-term care Indiana covers. And we've just been real fortunate over the years where there's been some thinking outside the box, adding to other services, not just nursing home care, and then deciding, hey, we're going to actually put some money behind this over and over and over again. So we're in a pretty good position. Obviously, like anything with healthcare, it could use some tweaks, but we've got some things that some states just don't have.
Well, I was having a conversation with someone the other day that's in the senior living, industry in another state. And honestly, I hate to say it, I don't remember what state it was now, but I was talking about Medicaid waiver and she had never heard of it.
Mm.
Okay. So, I mean, they may have it there, but it's not something that they're promoting or.
Yeah. Yeah. And it falls under the waiver simply because Indiana has capped what they're, so if every Medicaid recipient on the rolls decided, hey, I qualify for assisted living help and I want that help, Medicaid saying, oh, wait a minute here. We're only covering this many people under, and the feds have waived the requirement that everyone gets it. That's where waiver comes from.
Okay.
But nonetheless, we're fortunate because we've got enough funding, even with limited funds, to cover everybody so far in the last few years that's needed it.
And there's new communities popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
And then there's the home care assistance programs. There's multiple of those where they even will work with the family so the family can get paid, to help support that family member at home because they're not getting a chance to work or what have you because they're home taking care of them.
There's two programs under the waiver that allows a family member or a private individual to get paid by Medicaid for the care that they're providing. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, those are game changers. Those are, when you look at the statistics of what, this is so important for people to know is these things are out there because it's terrifying to think that you're on your own, that these things are here. I hear that 1 in 3 households have someone that's full-time caregiver for another family member in that household. You've got 1 in 6 millennials that's full-time caregiver for an older family member, so there's a lot of need out there, trying to deal with this, and it's only going to get more so as the boomers age, so.
Right. Well, I know our subject's Miller Trust, but that's something I encourage a lot of family members to do. I often will encounter, hey, I quit my job to take care of mom. And I said, well, why don't mom should pay you for your service outside of what Medicaid would cover. Mom should pay you something. And, oh, no, that's my mom. I understand. Everyone has, a lot of people have a family obligation. I take care of my mom. That's what people do. But when it gets down to it, you quit your job. So now no one's paying FICA taxes. So no one's paying into Medicare for you. No one's paying into Social Security for you. Well, if mom's paying you, you still have that benefit. This could go on for years. So you want to get those work credits so that if something happens to you, you've got coverage there. So,
I didn't realize this until just recently what you're talking about, but there's people that have taken care of mom for decades and then mom's gone. They don't own the house. Okay. They have never paid into FICA, so they have no Social Security that's going to come to them. They have no
right.
They're in a world of hurt.
Yep. And
it's just because people don't know and they walk themselves into these messes.
Right, right, right. Or we have the folks that mom has been paying, but there's never been a contract. And that's a problem for Medicaid and VA as well, because they all presume any financial transaction between daughter and mother is a gift. So contract helps overcome that. And that's why we work through a lot of these to say, okay, we're going to get a contract in place. This is a good idea. And you also will qualify for Medicaid when we do it this way.
Do you do the same thing with like someone that's dealing with a child or someone do things to help? Because I was going to say, if mom's staying home full time doing that because she can't leave, she's in that same boat.
Yeah, we do that quite a bit. And in fact, I just did this recently for a client who has a special needs trust, which is another one of the exceptions to the rule where disabled folks can set funds aside and still qualify for the benefit. And why it can't substitute for mom's obligation and support, this child is very, very needy. I mean, there's a lot of needs outside of what a typical 11-year-old needs. So mom's getting paid by the trust through a contract for those things that, well, first, frankly, if mom wasn't doing it, a third party would be coming in and doing it. And it's not everyday things that she did. By 11, you're not changing diapers and you're not administering feeding tubes and things like that she's doing, and she's getting paid for it now.
Yeah, these literally will change the lives of people, because I can't even imagine what they've been going through with. And I guarantee, I don't know, I'm not going to try to put you on a spot here. I would imagine there's a whole bunch of people out there that are dealing with this that have absolutely no idea they've got the support that they could reach into.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been having some issues with application processing here recently, and I'm not concerned because I know what the rules are. I know what, there's a certain period of time that an application has to be turned around. My concern is how many people there aren't represented. And we know that less than 1% of folks who are filing Medicaid applications or just doing anything with a Medicaid agency are unrepresented. So those folks don't know that, hey, they had 45 days to process it. It's 60 days, it's 75 days. They don't know that that's wrong. And so that's my big thing. I want to serve my clients well, but I also want to set policy for the community so that folks that don't know aren't being taken advantage of, or just not knowing and giving up. That's my big concern.
Well, yes, why did Life's Copilot exist is one of the things was my dealing with frustration with family members trying to get through things. 18 months getting rejected at VA because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't, then I met you, found out it works a lot better with that. But the thing is, it's so much that's not known that people are walking out there blindly, and it was like, I remember there was right before we started Life's Copilot, there was a news article that was getting a lot of attention. It was not a local one, but it was salacious, so it got a lot of press, about an older couple that committed suicide because they were so overwhelmed with medical bills and what have you, and they just didn't see any way out. Mm-hmm. And I posted something on Facebook saying, this is not necessary. I get why you can feel this way, but it's not necessary. We have resources, we have services, we have programs. And I had someone, reach out to one of the, the main, I had them, I said, at least ask the COA. Well, I asked the COA and they asked about Medicaid waiver or Medicaid, and they just got read out of the book. They didn't find out the other parts. So I'm like, we need to have some platform where people can go and get information and learn, get you experts talking, so they can do this. Is there back to the Miller's Trust, is there an amount that's the max that could go into one on an income stream? Or
well, an individual can only put income into the trust, so the max would be whatever their monthly income is. If somebody makes $6,000 a month, then they could put $6,000 a month into the Miller Trust.
So they've got a IRA that's paying out that kind of money that they have to pull out every whatever, that type of thing. That income could be going towards that, or is it maybe it's a retirement plan? Or
I'm going to switch your example to say a pension.
Okay.
Find a benefit plan, or instead of a defined contribution plan, because an IRA probably I wouldn't be able to have an IRA and also qualify for Medicaid in the
Okay,
first.
all right.
But if I'm getting Social Security coming in of $2,000 a month, and I'm getting $3,000 a month and from a couple pensions, then and I've got an $8,000 nursing home bill, I still need Medicaid. But so I can put all $5,000 into my Miller Trust every month. That gets me over the cap. There's no limit on how much I can put into it. It just can't be, if I'm getting $5,000 a month, it can't be $5,500, because then I'm putting some assets in there too. It can only be.
So basically it does cover. So it's not just somebody that's marginal. It's somebody that can still do basically. So that's great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what kind of things your uses and misuses? What are people doing wrong?
I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing, I'll just say there. I'll say two. The first thing I'm seeing often is just what I've been harping on since I started. It's for income only. And I'm seeing some folks that just kind of, whenever they have extra funds they don't know what to do with, they put it in there. So that's the biggest misuse. If mom only gets $2,500 a month in income, that's all that you can deposit in there per month. If you put $3,000 in there, you've created a problem. The second thing that I'm seeing is just lack of understanding on how to use the trust. So don't give Christmas gifts out of the trust. I mean, don't mom's always given $100 a year, so I wrote 3 $100 checks to her grandkids for Christmas. That doesn't work. Grandkids aren't a beneficiary of the trust. Mom is. So I guess that's the second thing that I see. Those are kind of the biggest things.
So while we're doing that, would you have the trustee take out of grandma's 25 whatever a month, and that's where she would pull to do her $300 for her grandkids?
You could, because you can give up to $1,200 a year without it being a problem for Medicaid.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. She could do that. She just couldn't, like I said, the trustee can't write checks to the kids. That doesn't work. And I know that I alluded to this a little bit, but anything that's left in the trust when someone passes away, the trustee has an obligation to pay those funds. There's no net. It's the gross amount goes to the state of Indiana. You can't pay attorney's fees. You can't pay a trustee fee. All of that has to go to the state of Indiana. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think a lot of people think that, I wouldn't call this a misuse, because I don't think there's any intent behind it. They don't know that I have to pay that to the state. I think a lot of people think, well, the state's going to come take that at some point in time. No, they don't come take it. The trustee has an obligation to write that final check out to the state of Indiana.
And the clock is the moment the death certificate reads.
Right. Exactly.
So you can't go 15 minutes later and jump in and do it. So yeah.
No, you can't. Yeah.
Well, interesting. So like I said, I know that a lot of people talk about Miller's Trust, but like I said, I know that they also don't understand them. So this is very helpful. I'm looking forward to having this in our portfolio of videos, to be able to share. Do you have anything else you wanted to cover here, or?
No, I think that's the main points. Again, it's not for assets. It can be used for just about anything for the beneficiary, for the recipient. There's just some limitations. You make a direct distribution, can't make cash distributions, and you need to make sure that there's some food, clothing, or shelter being matched by the person's own income to make a distribution. And that's kind of the big things. I think a lot of people are told you can only use the Miller Trust for medical expenses. And in general, that's what most of them are being used for. But if it's accumulating in there, you don't have to wait for a medical expense. There's other things you can use the trust on. And that's the other thing. I think it's unfortunate that there may be somebody sitting with a $5,000 in their Miller Trust account and think they have to wait on a medical bill when mom needs some new clothes. It can be used for the new clothes.
As long as she buys a pack of underwear.
She buys a pair of socks that same. Okay. You got it.
Very good. Well, I was not aware of that at all. So, well, let me show real quick what's coming up on our next panel here. I'm going to do a screen share real quick. So what we have coming up next is, and kind of this is going to be interesting. This is Indiana Health Fund is going to be on here, and they're going to be talking about how to basically understand your medical bill and preventing medical debt. And they're a phenomenal resource. We have another one coming up in January, a grab and go paperwork ready for emergency. So we have things like that. And then where you want to find these videos, you can come in here and go to the video library, and this video will be in here probably tomorrow. So as far as that goes, so you'll be able to come in here and see past videos where you can learn from other ones that have been on here. Like, for instance, the last one we had was how to deal with off periods and dyskinesia. So basically that's that. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This was great information, and we'll get this video out. I'll get a copy to you as soon as I get it done. So
wonderful. I appreciate it. Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jeff. See you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.